Is Kansas City, Missouri the location, and is Ian Machado Garry the person to halt the momentum of the fighting nerds? That is what we are going to find out this upcoming weekend in the main event of UFC Kansas City, the number 7 ranked Ian Machado Garry taking on the number 13 ranked Carlos Prates. This is an absolutely massive fight with big-time implications for the top 10 / even title picture of this absolutely on-fire welterweight division right now. Ian Machado Garry looking to bounce back from his first professional loss, which took place at UFC 310 in December, and in order to do so, he's stepping in on short notice and taking on the undefeated in the UFC, surging 1/4 of the fighting nerds, Carlos Prates. Someone moves one step closer to title contention on Saturday night, and the other falls pretty far down the totem pole. The 15-1, 27-year-old Irishman Ian Machado Garry has been nearly unbeatable in the UFC, and all of that momentum that he had garnered in his first few years in the promotion was put to a stop by the undefeated still Shavkat Rakhmonov in their number 1 contender fight last December. And very similarly to this outing for Ian Machado Garry at UFC Kansas City, it was a short notice replacement for him after Belal Muhammad was ruled out of the fight due to injury and could no longer defend his title against Shavkat Rakhmonov. And while he put his 15-0 and 8-0 in the UFC record on the line and would ultimately lose and suffer the first defeat of his career on that night against Shavkat Rakhmonov, it did not come without a fight. It did not come without some very impressive moments for Ian Machado Garry, where he proved that Shavkat Rakhmonov is actually human. He even held dominant control near the end of that fight and had Shavkat Rakhmonov in a rear naked choke, where he was displaying very improved skills in his grappling and jiu-jitsu, something that we've seen over the last few fights from Ian Machado Garry now, and it was on full display against the biggest and best opponent that he has faced thus far in the UFC, but it wasn't quite enough to get the victory. Now he looks to bounce back from that first ever loss, hold his spot in the top 10, and hold his name in the relevancy of title contenders at 170. Prior to that loss against Shavkat Rakhmonov, Ian Machado Garry had beaten Michael Venom Page, he had beaten Jeff Neal, he had beaten Neil Magny, he had finished Daniel Rodriguez. He was improving his competition fight by fight in the UFC through those first 8 bouts, and he earned that opportunity to be in there against Shavkat Rakhmonov. However, that night on December 7th of 2024 just didn't belong to him. It belonged to Rakhmonov, who still is undefeated and who may not be fighting for the title next month due to his own injury, but will be fighting for the title by the end of 2025 undoubtedly. And the former Cage Warriors champion Ian Machado Garry blasted into the UFC with tons of momentum back in 2021, known for his long, rangy striking and finishing prowess on the regional scene in Cage Warriors. It turned into an ever-growing and evolving skill set through his first 9 fights in the UFC thus far. As I said, it was on full display against Shavkat Rakhmonov with his grappling, but we saw him use it and get the victory against Michael Venom Page, where he wasn't quite up to par on his feet. He was able to utilize wrestling and jiu-jitsu to grind out the victory. And in my opinion, I think that is what he's going to try and do once again against Carlos Prates, because this man is one of the most dangerous, lethal strikers in the welterweight division right now. And Ian Machado Garry's fight IQ is just much too high to stand and trade with someone as dangerous as Prates, in my opinion. I think he's going to look to grapple. I think he's going to look to use his jiu-jitsu and test Carlos Prates much more so than anyone that Carlos has faced thus far in his brief but very successful UFC career. Carlos Prates finished Mitch Ramirez in August of 2023 on Dana White's Contender Series, and since then has not looked back, as he has tallied off 4 consecutive victories in the UFC, every single one of them by way of knockout. And all 4 of those fights came in 2024. You could make an argument, and a very strong one at that Carlos Prates not only was the newcomer of the year, but he was the male fighter of the year. And much like Ian Machado Garry, he gradually had to step up in competition each step of the way, and it finished 2024 with a victory and stoppage via knockout against the longtime veteran and the ultimate gatekeeper, and I say that in a respectful way, in Neil Magny. And that was what was able to get Carlos Prates from unranked into the top 15 and into the discussions of who the best welterweights in the world are. The 31-year-old Prates is 21-6 overall, finished 19 of those 21 victories, and 16 of those 19 are by way of knockout. The last time that Prates tasted defeat was actually in one championship in June of 2019, and since then has tallied off 11 consecutive victories, with 10 of them in a row by way of knockout. This will be Carlos Prates' second consecutive UFC main event. However, in that first main event, it was against Neil Magny at UFC Vegas 100. The biggest card in UFC history, mind you.
What?
But that fight didn't even make it to the second round. As a matter of fact, it ended at the 4-minute and 50-second mark of round number 1. So will Carlos Prates, the man that smokes 10 to 15 cigarettes a day, be able to go into the deep waters against Ian Machado Garry? Because that is what I foresee him having to do in order to get the nod here. Even if he can finish Ian Garry, which would be incredibly impressive, I don't think it comes easy, and I don't think it comes early. Prates hasn't even been to a third round since 2019, the first victory of this 11-fight win streak that he is on. Whereas Ian Machado Garry has had a plethora of decision victories in the UFC and even holds 25-minute experience against one of the best welterweights in the world in Shavkat Rakhmonov just 5 months ago. So for Prates, I think he's going to want to come in and put away Ian Machado Garry early, something that no one, quite literally in his professional career, has been able to do. 15 victories, 1 defeat, and the lone defeat was the decision loss to Shavkat Rakhmonov, where Ian Machado Garry was never even really in danger of being finished, and that was against someone in Rakhmonov who has quite literally finished every single other one of his opponents. And not only does Ian Machado Garry hold knockout power with 7 of his 15 victories by way of finish, he can get the job done over the course of a decision, and he has shown an ever-evolving skill set in the grappling department, and I think he's actually hungry to put that on more display than we've seen him do thus far and get a submission victory if I had to put my money on it. And Carlos Prates may just be the man to do that against, as he has been submitted in 3 of his 6 losses and even been knocked out in 2. So in 6 career losses, Carlos Prates has been finished 5 times. But at the end of the day, the man hasn't lost in 6 years for a reason, and I think it is going to be an absolute battle here between Carlos Prates and Ian Machado Garry. Prates is going to want to come in and put Ian Machado Garry away as quickly as possible, because the longer that this fight goes, the more I lean Ian Machado Garry, and I think the more that Carlos Prates would probably have to agree with me. And for Garry, I've already said it. I think he's going to come in and I think he's going to utilize his grappling early and often and able to have the most success in this fight. And it's going to be up to Prates and his takedown defense and his ever-improving fight IQ in the UFC against the best of the best to show that he can keep the fight standing in his realm and ultimately get a victory, whether that be by knockout or over the course of 25 minutes, which may even be more impressive in my opinion. I would love to know your predictions on this fight because it is a massive one in this 170-pound weight class. For Carlos Prates, the weight of the Fighting Nerds takeover falls on his shoulders. Jean Silva successfully held that weight at UFC 314 a few weeks ago, and now it is his turn, and if he can successfully go here, then it's going to probably fall on Caio Borralho, and the trend will just continue until someone ultimately loses. Surely they can't all just remain undefeated in the UFC, right? And for Garry, it's a massive bounce back opportunity before he gets bounced out of the top 10 and out of the title discussion for the immediate future. Give me your predictions for this welterweight scrap down in the comments below. And now that we are done with the main event discussion, let's jump into the rest of the card, and we will start in the co-main event where the former title challenger, the return of the Mac entrance, well, he hasn't used that in quite a while, but at one point it was my favorite entrance in the UFC, Anthony Smith will be calling it a career this Saturday in Kansas City, Missouri, and standing in his way is an ultra-dangerous prospect. Anthony Smith will be making his final walk to a mixed martial arts cage this Saturday at UFC Kansas City in what will be his 60th professional fight. Yes, you heard me right, 60. 38 victories, 21 defeats, 35 out of 38 wins by way of stoppage. In 16 of his 21 losses, he has been finished. This man is the definition of kill or be killed, having ever only gone the distance 8 total times in 59 fights thus far. And will that trend continue as he is going up against a very, very dangerous prospect, one of the better prospects in the light heavyweight division right now, Zhang Mingyang. Zhang was on the 2022 Road to the UFC series and has since made his UFC debut last February at UFC 298, where he has went 2-0 so far in the UFC, both by first round knockout in a combined time of just a little over 4 minutes. But respectfully, to go from Brinson Ribeiro and Adi Diaz to Anthony Smith is quite the jump here, maybe even bigger than Ludovic Klein getting a matchup against Mateusz Gamrot. But for the 26-year-old out of China, he looks to be the part of a legitimate threat in this light heavyweight division, as he has finished all 18 of his victories and has not lost a fight since October of 2019. And much like Carlos Prates in the main event, he finds himself on an 11-fight win streak. Now can he make it 12 against the Lionheart, the former title challenger, multi-weight class competing Anthony Smith? Anthony has lost 5 of his last 7 fights, so it does feel time for him to call it a career and hang up the gloves, but not before him getting another victory to make it 39 to cap out this very long-tenured UFC stint and just professional stint in general that I believe started with him seeing a flyer at his local Subway. He went 1-2 in 2024. It started with a short notice victory against Vitor Petrino at UFC 301, but would be followed up by back-to-back losses to Roman Dolidze, which was another short notice replacement, and then a knockout loss to Dominic Reyes, but that one was where Anthony Smith lost his longtime friend and training partner, even mentor and coach. And you could just tell as he made the walk to the cage, he was not mentally ready to be in there against someone who is surging right now in Dominic Reyes. So now I just hope that Anthony is fully ready, 100% spiritually, mentally, and physically to cap out his career and for his sake, go out with a bang. I will say that experience for Anthony Smith, in my opinion, will play the biggest factor in this fight, and I absolutely feel that he can get the victory over someone that is much less battle-tested in Zhang Mingyang, not only in number of fights, but against competition as well. Smith has quite literally been in there in 185 and 205 pounds against the best of the best, John Jones, where Anthony Smith literally could have become the light heavyweight champion of the world due to disqualification, but chose not to. The current champion, Magomedov, Khalil Roundtree, a former title challenger. I just listed Dominic Reyes, who you could argue beat John Jones many years ago. You name it, he's been in that octagon against them. Most of the time, he's won, but many of them he has also lost. He is never saying no to a fight, and I think that mindset shows against Zhang Mingyang. I'm nervous for Anthony Smith. I love the guy. I think he's great on commentary and with his analysis in podcasts, and he's a kill or be killed fighter. I want to see him go out on top with a victory, but this is a big, big test, a big threat, and a big, dangerous uphill battle. Next up in the featherweight division is a fight that is getting supremely slept on, and maybe that's just because of my fandom of David Onama, but damn it, this fight slept on. It is the number 12 ranked featherweight in the world, Giga Chikadze, taking on David Onama, who is unranked but looking to launch into the top 15 in the UFC for the very first time. Giga Chikadze has lost 2 of his last 3 outings, and we have just not seen him fight very often over the last couple of years. 1 fight in 2024, 1 fight in 2023, and 1 fight in 2022. Meanwhile, David Onama is on a 3-fight win streak, including a 2-0 year in 2024, decisions over Roberto Romero and Jonathan Pierce. And overall, he's 5-2 in the UFC since making his debut against Mason Jones in October of 2021, where they went to war for 15 minutes, one of the best fights of the year. So since David Onama has debuted, he's fought 7 times in the UFC versus Giga's 3 over the same time period. But before this skid and inactivity that Giga finds himself on, he was great in the UFC. He made his debut in 2019 and started his tenure 7-0 all the way up until Calvin Kattar would halt that momentum in January of 2022, and that is where the inactivity begins. And now Giga Chikadze all of a sudden is 36 years old. He's no spring chicken. He's no longer in his prime, whereas David Onama is just now entering that prime period. He's 30 years old, 13-2 overall, and finished 11 of his 13 victories. This man is violent, and he's fighting where he's currently training and living, Kansas City, Missouri. He is an absolute beast of a man, and he is deserving of this opportunity, and I would love nothing more than to see him launch himself into the legitimate top 15 of this 145-pound division that is on fire right now, but it is a very big test. Giga Chikadze is a very high-level striker, and David Onama has shown that he can be hit in his fights. So if he can weather the storm, if he can manage the shots and the rangy strikes and the precision that Giga Chikadze displays, David Onama will really open my eyes and show just how damn good he is. Not to mention, he has a sneaky good grappling and wrestling game, and I think in terms of best path to victory, he may want to implement that here instead of making it a back and forth war on the feet. But we'll see. Time will tell. This is the must-watch fight for Saturday night, in my opinion. The 31-year-old Michel Pereira, who looks at least 56, is back, looking to bounce back from his first loss in quite some time, where he would fall victim to a main event defeat to Anthony Hernandez last October, but prior to that had won 8 consecutive fights and hadn't lost since February of 2020, and that one was a disqualification due to him delivering an illegal knee to Diego Sanchez. And standing in his way from bouncing back from that Anthony Fluffy Hernandez defeat is Abus Magomedov, who's on a 2-fight win streak, both of them coming in 2024. One, a submission against Bruno Ferreira in October, and prior to that, a decision over Warley Alves. Abus Magomedov, let us not forget, made his UFC debut in September of 2022, knocked out Dustin Stoltzfus in 19 seconds, and was literally in his second UFC fight catapulted into the deep end, quite literally, against Sean Strickland in a main event. Sean Strickland would not only win that fight, he would finish Abus Magomedov and go on to become the middleweight champion by dethroning Israel Adesanya. Abus would then lose to Caio Borralho, so, I mean, honestly, look at those 2 losses. Sean Strickland will go on to be champion. Caio Borralho may be a future champion, and possibly not that far away from that. And that is where the 2-fight win streak and bounce back year happened for Abus, and now he looks to launch himself into the top 15 with a victory against the very dangerous and unique Michel Pereira, who isn't quite as wild as he used to be, doing somersaults and backflips into the cage, but he's toned it down just enough to display a very good skill set of weapons in that octagon, and I feel like this is a decent opportunity for him to have a bounce back, but Abus Magomedov could prove me very much wrong and show that he deserves to be a top 15 middleweight just a couple of years after he first got the opportunity. And while there's no more ranked fights on this card, there are some very sneaky fun matchups that I want to just give some shine to before we get on out of here today. And it starts with Randy Brown versus Nicolas Dalby in the welterweight division. The Rude Boy, friend of the program. This is a fun one. Randy Brown will enter this fight after a very close split decision loss to Brian Battle last December, but before that had tallied off 3 consecutive victories, and now the longtime UFC veteran looks to get right before it's too little too late, as he is now 34 years old, but right on the cusp, right on the outside looking in of the top 15 at 170. And the 40-year-old Nicolas Dalby is also coming off of a loss, but it was also a very close split decision. For him, it was against Hanat Fakhretdinov, and before that, he had won 4 in a row. So these guys find themselves on very similar career trajectories. Someone will go on a losing streak, the other is back in the win column. I think this is going to be a very entertaining fight. And lastly, we've got Ikram Aliskerov looking to bounce back from his loss to Robert Whittaker last June, and in order to do so, he will have to take out Andre Muniz. Aliskerov was a 2022 Dana White Contender Series alum and victor, where he would then earn his contract into the UFC and start 2-0 with victories over Phil Hawes via knockout and a knockout against Warley Alves. But then he would take a short notice opportunity against Robert Whittaker last June in the UFC's first fight night in Saudi Arabia. Robert Whittaker was originally slated to face Khamzat Chimaev, who, fun fact, is the only other person to ever defeat Ikram Aliskerov, and that came way back in April of 2019 via knockout. But that short notice opportunity for Ikram Aliskerov would not pay off, as he would get in there against Robert Whittaker, the former champion, and be disposed of in less than 2 minutes by way of first round knockout. So now, after some decent time away, 10 months if my math is correct, he will look to bounce back and showcase that he is still a very elite fighter in this middleweight division that is also really surging right now. We had the middleweight marathon in the month of February with 5 top 15 matchups, and now we have one right on the outside looking in. He's taking on the 35-year-old Andre Muniz, who is coming off of a victory in his last fight in December of 2023, however, so an inactive stretch of things here for Andre Muniz. I don't think that this pans out well for him. That inactivity paired with the true elite skill sets and dangerous power that Ikram possesses, I think this is a big uphill battle, but it could be a big underdog opportunity for Muniz to shut up the doubters. So that is it for the UFC Kansas City preview. If there are any other fights that you think I should have mentioned, drop them down in the comments below and give me your best storylines for those bouts. And be sure to give me your predictions for this card in the comments below as well. Who gets the victory in that main event between Ian Machado Garry and Carlos Prates, alongside all of the other big fights that I discussed here. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Every single week, I break down and preview the biggest and best fights, talk about the storylines and what is at stake heading into the weekend, and in the aftermath, I recap the most meaningful results. I also give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Monday and Friday, podcast episodes released there. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you all in the next video.